Welcome to Trail Chasers Season 3, a beginner's guide to trail running. Last week, we talked about how community plays a crucial role in trail running. But how do you actually start running? Today, we're diving into the fundamentals of running with a coach who has helped countless beginners take their first steps in the sport. My guest today is Erin van Eyssen, an experienced coach and the founder of Flat Rock Endurance Academy. He has guided runners at all levels, focusing on sustainable athletic growth and the long-term development of his athletes. In this episode, Erin and I break down how to start trail running the right way. If you've ever felt overwhelmed about where to begin, this episode will give you a step-by-step guide to avoid common mistakes and build confidence on the trails. We'll go through the basics, touch on the common pitfalls, and wrap up with Erin's best advice for new trail runners. Erin, welcome to the Trail Chasers.
Thanks for having me.
How are you feeling?
Stressed? No, all good.
It'll be fun. I'm also stressed, don't worry. So we've kind of restructured the podcast, and each season we're going to basically do an episode as if we were going on a trail run. We're going to stop every 15 minutes for some interesting questions and some fun questions, and to give you a little bit of a break from my interrogation. To start off with, if you're at the beginning of a run or a beginning of a race, what are you kind of doing? What are you doing on that start line, or what are you doing at that beginning of kind of your every trail run?
Race or trail run?
Okay, let's go both. So,
let's go race.
Yeah.
So, trail run, I guess, just happy to get out there.
Yeah.
Race, probably, trying to manage the nerves, trying to remember the work I've put in to get to where I am, quieten that voice of doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And are you front of the pack, or you kind of chase from behind?
It definitely depends on the distance.
Okay.
And how soon we're going to hit the single track and get backed up.
Okay, yes, so that's always an important one.
But I think starting amongst your peers is generally a good idea if you want to not run out too hard.
Amazing.
So, yeah.
So this season, one of our sponsors is Gilnockie Socks, which I am wearing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a picture of a pair of socks. And so this is the picture. And at the end of the episode, I'll give you some time to think about it. I'm going to ask you for your 2 words that will go on the back of your socks. So you've got about an hour to think about it. But don't let it distract you from the episode. Let's talk a bit about who you are. Without thinking, it's not a sort of deep and introspective question. What have been the 5 most pivotal moments in your running career, coaching career, up till now?
Okay, 5. I think firstly was probably finding running myself. It's pretty, I wasn't super sporty in high school. Kind of, we did the sport that was mandated by the school. You had to be part of some team. You had to do something. I never really fitted in too well with that, and sort of found running in my early 20s. And it was this thing that relied solely on me and allowed me to explore. And I think that's definitely number 1. Number 2 was probably putting in the work and seeing that go from this thing that seemed impossible to this thing that I was kind of okay at, and seeing that progression and like hard work pay off.
Yeah.
Pretty special. 3, probably becoming a coach. So making that transition from just being a student with myself as a single project to looking at ways of helping others sort of, get better, improve, figure out their training. Where are we now? That was 3. 4.
Yeah.
4 was probably having people trust me with that process.
Yeah.
So like having people come to me and with the things that they want to achieve and be willing to put those goals into my hands to help, which is was a huge honor and quite a realization when that happened that okay, this is an important thing and people care. And then I guess, probably building Flat Rock to the point that it is now with having other coaches on board, having athletes, perform at a really high level internationally and see that progress is probably the final sort of,
incredible.
feather in the cap, cherry on top. Yeah.
And how are each of those kind of evolutions, from nothing to runner to, was it a kind of a natural kind of progression, or?
It's probably the thing I've been most consistent with in my life. I have done different things and had different interests. But I think for the last, it's almost 15 years now, it's been running. And that's been a constant through all the other things that have come and gone. It's been quite special to find that. And each level up or upgrade or change in my relationship with it has come with a lot. I mean, there was once just me and I just had to run, and that was nice and easy. And then all of a sudden it was my running and then coaching and understanding it and trying to separate those two aspects of being a coach, but also just being an athlete myself. And it's been a good journey.
When was the first time you kind of knew you wanted to be a coach?
So it was probably working at the run store in Greenpoint, in Bree Street in town. And we had a number of athletes at a pretty high level working there. And at that point, I had done a lot of sort of research and reading myself, and realized that I had a bit to share, and I had an ability to make sense of where someone was and what they might need. And I had these athletes that were way better than me asking me for advice, and I was like, okay, this is an interesting space. And I think I've always naturally leaned into helping people and being in that space. I decided to make a shift and started studying coaching sciences for that reason.
And how do you kind of balance your own running and coaching? Was it just...
It's pretty tough, to be honest. I mean, Flat Rock is 7 years old now. It'll be eight this year. And had been coaching for a couple of years before that. And it is tricky because you know a lot. So you overthink all these things that you see quite clearly in the athlete that comes to you. It's quite difficult to have that same honesty with yourself. When you start out, you just run. It's not complicated. The more you do it, the better you get at it, to a point. And now as a coach with that information, it's quite a juggling act to balance where I am and where, I think I should be or would like to be, and knowing what others put in to get to where they are and knowing what I would need to. If you don't know that, it's quite a nice sort of easy build-up. It's tricky. And definitely something I'm figuring out this year quite purposefully.
If you had, obviously you've got a business card and it says coach on it, but in life in general, if you had a kind of a business card for your life, what would it say under that?
Oh, wow. Dad? Probably more than, so coach, dad, nerd.
Is that a run nerd?
Run nerd and just nerd in general, probably, in the traditional sense as well.
Amazing. You've obviously worked with a lot of runners, and you worked across the board, runners, road, trail. So you're kind of in a unique position where beginners would come to you to kind of navigate their journey or start kind of running. So from your perspective, what are the kind of the key aspects you focus on when introducing someone to running, to trail running, from the get-go?
So I guess initially we need a bit of an assessment as to where they are. Like, where does that individual stand? Everyone comes to the sport with a different background. Some have never run before, and their only experience is having maybe joined a friend on a trail run and realizing this is a pretty cool thing. Where some might be, very high-level athletes from a different sport. So it's about assessing what they bring to the table already with their experience, history, and then trying to find, I guess, what they need to transition into trail safely. So as a broad answer would be finding ways for them to be consistent, to get exposure that is specific to their target race or goal. Generally, this is something I think Steve Magnus shared, but helping the athlete get out of their own way. So kind of making sense of what they can sustainably achieve in a given week, and then kind of laying out a plan that allows them to follow that and stay healthy, really.
Do you find that most people, at what stage of the journey do most people come to you? Is there an average, or is it kind of across the board?
It's definitely across the board. In trail specifically, there seems to be obviously we know that the ultra trail running world, and we need to specify that they are not, it's not all ultras. It's everything from a VK to 100 miles and beyond. But generally, a lot of people sort of start looking for help when the distances get far enough that it also almost seems impossible. And then it's about finding someone that can help lay out a plan that makes sense of the seemingly impossible thing and bridging those 2 points. So a lot of people kind of come in from that 20, 30K distance, looking to maybe do a 50K.
Yeah.
And they might have struggled in the first two. And now how do I make sense of stepping up to that next level? So a lot of people in that area. But then at the same time, some people who have never run and want to run 100 miles is their first goal. Yeah. Like they watch the documentary or their friend did it and they want to take this thing on. And then some people who would love to run a 5K and do it injury-free and enjoy it. So quite a range, yeah.
How do you kind of manage those expectations right up front?
A balancing act of, I guess, providing them with some insight as to their own abilities.
Yeah.
So, in some cases you're building confidence and in some cases you're building respect for a distance. Maybe they've never gone far enough to realize how much discomfort might be in store for them. So maybe some exposure to said discomfort might allow them to sort of reestablish a timeline for those goals. So not saying we're not going to do it, but maybe this year's not the best year. Maybe putting that out a bit. And in some cases, maybe it's allowing them to see what they are capable of. And maybe that's far beyond what they thought. So again, depending on who arrives, we have to do one or the other.
Managing the person. We're going to take a little bit of a break now. That was our first little section. So if you're running, you're running now and you're by yourself and you're running up a sort of a really hard hill, or you're power hiking up a really hard hill, and it feels like it's never going to end, what are you kind of repeating to yourself? What is that kind of mantra that you're kind of telling yourself to just keep going?
That it is going to end.
Yeah.
Like sometimes in that discomfort, we seem to forget that these things are not infinite,
yeah.
that it does end.
Yeah.
And that, no hill's going to last forever.
Yeah.
That's probably an anecdote for life as well.
Yeah.
But I think it will end. Chin up, chest out, pump away and get it done.
Yeah.
You can stop and have a cry about it, but the hill's still going to be there. So might as well keep going.
And are you someone that kind of does better knowing when it's going to end, or do you kind of just prefer? Okay, cool.
I like to kind of break down exactly where everything's going to sit and what to expect. Yeah.
No, I fall into that category as well.
I mean, it has its own drawbacks. I think it can be a limiting factor. There are people who love the unknown and discovering everything on the day.
Yeah.
As a coach, that's leaving too much to to chance than I would like. Yeah.
All right, let's get into the reason why we're kind of doing this season, which is helping people get into trail running and really just getting started on that journey. Because I think, we know that once people get into it, it's an incredible sport.
It is very special.
For someone that's just starting out, what is the most important thing? I mean, it's obviously extremely broad, but, what is the most important thing someone should focus on right in the beginning?
Probably forget performance and enjoy it.
Yeah.
I think it's generally, there's that timeline of find the sport, enjoy the sport, want to be better. And there's a turning point at which it becomes quite metric driven and performance driven. And that can often stunt progress and enjoyment. So I think finding a way to fully enjoy it while keeping that build up the volume manageable and safe. So run with mates, explore new routes. Don't look at your watch. Record it if you need to. But, spend more time looking up than looking down. And I guess focus on yourself. It can become quite a competitive thing against others. We all progress differently. And that can also be a deterrent for a lot of people and make it quite intimidating. Most people, if you ask them to go for an hour-long hike, would have no real concern. They average sort of fitness and health. Yet, our trail run can sound quite intimidating for someone who's never done it. So, starting slow, walking the hills and jogging back down is a trail run.
I mean, that leads quite nicely into the next question is, obviously I think one of the things is you say enjoy it, but then if you're pushing yourself too hard in the beginning, it's not really going to be enjoyable. So how do you kind of assess that fitness or kind of where you are or where you should start in as a kind of beginner on the trails?
It's a good question because I think there's a lot of talk at the moment about training zones and them needing to be really specific and, training's only valuable if done in the correct zone at the correct time. Your average beginner is not fit enough to have neat and tidy zones. The act of going up a hill is probably going to push them into the red. Yeah. And for them to pursue the activity, they're going to have to get uncomfortable and probably, not spend time in the ideal zones that a coach might want. Yeah. So I think acceptance of that from the start of like, don't look at the metrics, don't look at the heart rate data. Try and keep it comfortable as much as you possibly can. Honestly, conversational pace kind of comfortable. Understand that it's unlikely to be most of your first few weeks of running. But with enough time and sort of exposure, that fitness will come and you will be able to keep things easier. And then the metrics start making more sense as you progress.
Yeah.
So the average person trying to go up a hill is going to be in the red pretty early on. And, 8 weeks down the line, they might be able to run up that hill, 15, 20 beats a minute lower and actually be comfortable and conversational. Then we can start working with time in the different zones.
And I think something quite important is that kind of balance between, strength and endurance. And I guess we all kind of go for the endurance aspect, as a beginner, it's like, cool, I'm going to run further and further every time. But how do you kind of bring that back to like, it's just as important, to build up your kind of strength from the get-go?
It really is. And the beginning is probably the best time to do so because running is riskier than time in the gym and strength work. So as a beginner runner, you're limited by how much you can do because of your current conditioning. And that builds with time, months and years of doing so. But, if you're limited to 3 runs a week, it's a good time to spend 2 to 3 days in the gym or on the bike or doing some kind of cross training. Yeah. We tend to ignore it because we found a love of running. So we want to run. Why do I want to go to the gym? Yeah. Which is kind of the opposite almost of the trails. But it's hugely valuable. And if done correctly, it doesn't need to be a very extreme thing. Your strength work can be quite manageable.
And then, to go alongside that as well, when it comes, as you were saying, when it comes to running in the beginning, you just want to kind of run. How important is that kind of the mindset, and getting into the right mindset and preparing your mind, for what's to come on the trails?
Yeah, I think it's pretty important. I don't know if it needs to be done or worked on consciously in the beginning. I think the act of running is one of, providing or finding comfort in discomfort or finding at least calm in discomfort.
Yeah.
And exposure to that in the beginning is likely to provide results in itself. I do think there comes a point at which you're knocking on both your physical and psychological limits. And then I think conscious work in that headspace is valuable. Yeah. But I think if you progress slowly enough and you provide the athlete or as an individual, building this for themselves, I think if you provide a safe enough progression in terms of distance, duration, in a given week, in a given run, you should be able to keep it at a threshold where you're winning consistently against yourself and the goals in hand and kind of building that confidence and that mindset that comes with it.
I mean, generally for most people, would you kind of say step out of that comfort zone as soon as possible? Or, is it, or is it kind of very dependent on the person?
I think it's dependent on the person. I think a lot of people find the sport because of their love of going to that pain cave. I think it's quite a spoken about aspect of the sport. And there's some big names who are quite happy to go and spend 24 hours in the discomfort. A lot of people, it might be quite foreign, and too much too soon might scare them away from it. So I think if you enjoy trail running and you found it and you're listening to this podcast, the likelihood is that you enjoy a bit of discomfort and then coming out the other side.
Yeah.
So we can assume that at base level there's some of that, but I think it's a muscle that can be trained. And if we balance the exposure to that discomfort and allow the athlete to realize what they can endure and survive and come out the other side from, I think it's a healthier progression than too much too soon and being scared away, and then you're rebuilding confidence after a big knock.
Yeah.
So that might be managing the distance that you expose yourself to, or the maybe it's the vert in the race, or maybe it's how isolated the race is. Maybe it's not just a local farm trail run. Maybe it's sky run and you're out there alone, and it's a very different experience. So I think picking those challenges is a good way to manage how we progress.
I think one of the kind of struggles with starting to run, and especially starting to trail run, is, like the confidence in learning those kind of skills, or, the kind of technical skills that are needed, or, to go from, as you were saying, like something like a Jeep track or a farm run to. So how do you kind of build that confidence, or how do you kind of suggest that people start building that confidence?
I think honesty with yourself and your abilities is very important. Trail running is different to road running in a number of ways, but one of them is that if things go wrong on the mountain, it's very different to things going wrong on the road.
Yeah.
So if you put yourself in a position where a rolled ankle means a mountain rescue, it's not the same as catching an Uber home from the promenade because your run went badly. So I think being honest with your abilities, building them up incrementally so that you know what you're capable of. You trust yourself to not just get to the top of the mountain, but get back down again. Maybe that means turning around a little bit sooner, progressively week on week, leaning on people with experience so that maybe you're not out there alone when you are pushing your fitness. At least make sure that you're not both pushing fitness and mountain savvy skills as well. Pick one or the other.
I think, as we kind of wrap up this section, I think it's so interesting, that kind of balance between, as you're saying, like trying to not be competitive, but also trying to run with people and trying to kind of develop yourself, but then also develop within that, within that kind of framework. So it's a very much I would say like a balancing act between a lot of different things. But if you do get it right, it's obviously can be pretty rewarding in the beginning.
Hugely so. And I think that social aspect in running with people is a big part of the sport, a big part of the driver and how most people are introduced to it. Not very many people just decide to go run on the mountain alone out of the blue. Most join some friends, join one of the local running groups or weekly runs that might happen. And they're a huge sort of asset in terms of getting into it. But I think it's important to know when, on average, you're training a little too hard, potentially as a beginner, which is the more likely case. And further down the line where the group runs might be a little too slow for you, not actually suiting that run's purpose. And knowing when to structure them. But I think, there are very few situations where a social run is a negative on the plan in terms of the averages of a week or a month of training.
When you're kind of out there running and you feel that it's now getting to that point where it's a bit uncomfortable and you're pushing yourself quite hard, and how conscious are you of your kind of form and how, like, if it's kind of slipping or it's just like I just need to push through this, how conscious are you of that and how do you kind of correct it?
Form is a tricky thing to correct in any kind of long or significant endurance event. You're probably better off trying to correct it in the gym and with drills and things like that beforehand. It's unlikely you're going to make any major changes in a run when you're in the pain cave and things are going south. Ideally, it's more about, I guess, managing intensity. If your form is failing, it's possibly because you're pushing too hard, or you're kind of not using a sustainable effort. So maybe adjusting that first. And looking at nutrition, making sure that everything body-wise is in order, and then dial it back, reassess. Get back to work.
Trail running beats up everything, your legs, your lungs, and especially your feet. The last thing you need is socks that give up before you do. That's why I'm thrilled to announce that this season of Trail Chasers is sponsored by Gilnockie Socks. These aren't just your run-of-the-mill socks. Gilnockie socks are made for people who demand more. More performance, more durability, and more comfort. They're designed to prevent blisters with premium moisture-wicking materials that keep your feet dry no matter how long or muddy the trail gets. Plus, they're treated with HydroCool and Silver Plus, so they stay fresh, breathable, and ready for your next adventure. Since I started using Gilnockie socks, I haven't had to stop mid-run to adjust or worry about discomfort. They just keep working mile after mile, run after run. So why settle for socks that don't keep up? Visit gilnockie.com and use the code TRAILCHASERS at checkout for 20% off your first order. Trust me, once you try them, you won't go back. Your feet will thank you. How do you kind of regain that, I guess, that focus when you're, when it's just everything hurts and it's like you're just redlining, and it's how do you kind of regain the kind of focus that like this is where I'm at, this is what's actually going on, this is where I kind of need to go.
I think it's a reminder of like this is why you came here, because that's usually the make or break point. I think the point you just described is the reason for most of our anxiety or stress going into an event is like, do I have what it takes when it comes to that moment that you just described to make the decisions I need to make to have the day I want to have, basically. So I think it's just a quick reminder that like that's why you got there. You came there to like overcome something. That moment is the thing you came to overcome. And I think bringing it back to that and then going, okay, like I have two choices now. I tap off. or I get to work and see what I've got. And it's not as simple as that. It might be very early in a very long race, in which case tapping off is exactly what you need to do and reassess. Or it might be at that make or break moment where holding on is what provides the result you want in the day.
Yeah, it's a very interesting, and it's very important as well. But yeah, as you say, like I think when it comes to kind of taking it back to kind of beginners getting into it, I think that's kind of why it's so important to manage that effort and kind of take it slow rather than kind of
meet that voice or meet that question when you're ready in incremental amounts. And have more wins against it than losses, and you'll trust yourself more and more.
Exactly.
As either the distances increase, if that's your goal, or if it's about pushing time and intensity. Either way, you're going to come to that same point of what now?
Yeah. Moving on to, I think, something which beginners, we've all kind of been there. It's as we've been saying, we just want to run, and training doesn't really factor too much into that discussion, but it's obviously an extremely important part. As you're saying, like with the, starting out, it's kind of the best time to get into those kind of habits. How do you think, like in terms of structuring your runs, in terms of structuring your routine, to build endurance, to prevent injury, what is the best? Is there kind of like a standard way of doing it?
So again, lots of factors to that based on who that person might be. But I think at its very core, the very simplest sort of starting point, it would be the more you run, the better you become at it.
Yeah.
And if that is introduced in a way that is safe, then it allows adaptation rather than injury.
Yeah.
So for that to be the case, the athlete needs to listen to their body.
Yeah.
And it's tricky because a lot of endurance running is telling the body to shut up so you can keep going. And all of a sudden we need to be listening to it at the same time. And how do we know? So I think trust in your gut between what is a niggle and an injury, what is muscular pain and fatigue. The one is expected and required for adaptation, and the other one will sort of stop us from finding consistency. But I think focusing on consistency as a number one will be the first point. Like, can you get out there more frequently?
Yeah.
Shorter amounts, more frequently. So, 5 days a week for 30 minutes is probably going to be healthier for you than a 2.5 hour long run out the gate. More frequent opportunities to adapt and recover and repeat rather than big efforts that set us back for long periods of time. And then, not focusing too much in terms of pace and the data, really bringing it back to how do I feel? Is this comfortable?
Yeah.
Because the biggest single decider is going to be volume. Like if you can get more volume in, you'll see more adaptations.
Yeah.
So create a weekly schedule or layout that allows you to do that in the safest way. Recover between your sessions. So, staying on top of your nutrition, pre and post run, get enough sleep, manage your stress, and repeat.
Yeah. It's so interesting because, when you say it, it's like that's a lot of different things. But obviously, if you're bringing it back to kind of making it more manageable, then those things are not a lot of things because it's, it's a lot smaller of a thing that you're kind of dealing with,
Start by doing less more frequently in a very manageable intensity as a single rule.
Yeah.
And when that becomes comfortable and no longer taxing, add a little bit more and continue. Give yourself enough rest. And obviously that's very sort of, dumbed down and simplified, but at its core, that is what is going through my mind when I build a plan for an athlete. Is what can we do to keep them healthy and doing this for long enough to see results? When
you look at, I think the interesting thing with trail running is you're obviously increasing distance, but you're also increasing, your vert. So how do you kind of balance that, and what is kind of the best way to, to increase your distance, increase your vert, and balance the two of them?
So I think the single change that can help, and this might be more applicable if someone's coming from a different discipline, maybe on the road running side, for example, over to trail, is distance doesn't matter quite as much as time. So your body only understands intensity and the duration with which it was it was exposed to that. So, a 2-hour run on Table Mountain could be 15 kilometers. It could be 20 kilometers, depending on what that route might look like. So your body doesn't care. It was exposed to a stimulus that it will adapt to for 2 hours. So a good way to manage that is to use your weekly training volume in time as a way to manage that weekly progression or how long you're out there for. If you might have a week where you do 2,000 meters over 50K, and a week where you do none, and that might change by 4 hours one week to another. So time would be a much better way to manage that buildup. And if you think of your body as a sort of tanker ship that needs to be nudged slowly in directions to change, whatever you bring it in slowly. So if you've been doing lots of flat running and the goal race might be a mountain race where a lot more climbing is involved, when you bring the climbing in, you might want to dial some of those other aspects back so that it has time to adapt to that new stimulus and reduce the risk of injury. Vice versa, you might have come from a block of lots of vert and lots of climbing, and now you want to do a super runnable race. Now the risk becomes that repetitive running, and then we would bring that in slowly and transition across.
And is there one over the other that would have more benefit to a person starting trail running, or is it also very person specific?
So, I mean,
was it a 50-50?
I think it needs to come back from the goal event. Like, are they training for a race that is very high in terms of vert, in which case that's something they need to be exposed to more than what is more beneficial. I think in terms of safety for the body, I think climbing and descending is generally easier on the body than long runnable miles, less repetitive, more varied in what's loaded. So it's much easier to go out and spend 2 hours going up and down a mountain than it is to go and run 2 hours flat. So if in doubt, spend more time sort of climbing and descending initially.
I certainly also found that, when building, as a beginner coming into it and coming obviously not from a road running kind of background, that the climbing and descending was definitely like the right way to kind of build that time and that build that base.
It's probably also the most foreign to any sport that individual might have come from. So unless they're a mountaineer and hiking is their background, in which case going up and down a mountain is what they do, then we would fill in the gaps that they don't bring. Most people aren't necessarily highly proficient at climbing and descending, and probably what they would have the most to gain, the ability to climb aerobically and well, and also the technical ability to descend quickly. Your average beginner climbs too hard and descends too slowly relative to their ability.
And how do you kind of encourage bringing in that kind of strength training, the cross training aspect of it, especially as a beginner starting out, you think running is just running. How do you kind of get that, the importance of that into someone's kind of program or into someone's mind?
It is tricky because, some people want to do all the sports and they kind of throw themselves at it, and some purely want to run. Very often in the beginning, runners, when they jump into a training plan, might be doing less running than they thought. It's generally against what their motivation might be. So it is, you could sell it as a way for them to get out there and be outdoors more often, even if it's on a bike or hiking, whatever, that other discipline might be. It's usually hugely valuable, especially cycling. But I think just the importance of let's focus on getting you active more often now. Keep the running at a controlled, safe volume and transition across to more running when there's a level of conditioning to support it.
What does the cross training kind of do to you, especially as a kind of beginner?
So running is obviously quite a sort of high impact sport. Not necessarily a dangerous one if it's brought in safely enough. But it is definitely limited by the volume one can do is limited by their conditioning. But something like cycling, for example, to jump on a bike and do a 1, 2, 3 hour ride is a lot easier on the body than the equivalent time spent running. Yet it's still building our cardiovascular fitness. So we're able to work on the other systems without the limitations that running might have for a beginner while we build that up. I guess it allows the athlete to move in different dimensions, different directions, exposure to more than that singular direction that running is generally provides a healthier athlete.
And, I think it's one of the trickiest things for beginners is the pacing element. And is that kind of just a matter of experience, or are there kind of tangible things that you can do to kind of work on your pace?
So experience is huge for sure. And that trust in yourself and knowing what you can sustain for a period of time helps pacing hugely. Linking back to, beginners not necessarily having very clear defined zones because just running will probably take them, to a point of being breathless. But the talk test is probably the single most accessible and universal metric to manage how hard you're working at a given time. And it's obviously limited by your respiratory rate. So how hard are you breathing would then relate to how hard your heart's pumping and how hard you're moving. So if you work back from that, you could split your zones up into 3: easy, moderate, and hard. And you could, say full sentences to your friend next to you while running in a zone 2, zone 1 effort, very comfortable. You're happy to chat, it wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah.
Your next level up would be, threshold/tempo type effort, where you could probably get out a few words before needing to get a breath, and you wouldn't want to do that for too long.
Yeah.
And then that final, max effort would be no conversation at all, breathing as hard as possible. And I think simplifying it to those 3 zones for a beginner, you want to spend as much time as possible in that easy one at the bottom, able to talk, and once or twice a week can dip into those 2 harder efforts.
Yeah.
Heart rate unfortunately floats. And won't be, especially in the beginning when everything is almost red line, won't be accurate. It's affected by temperature, hydration, all kinds of things, fatigue. And then pace on trail where it's rocky or climbing doesn't have a easily comparable sort of method. So the talk test for me would probably be the starting point.
How do you kind of encourage beginners, to manage the kind of mental side of it when everything is kind of feeling uncomfortable and every time you kind of want to quit?
Yeah, well, if it's always uncomfortable and you always want to quit, you're probably training too hard on average. And you probably need to dial it back. You probably shouldn't be running all the hills in the beginning. It's probably why you're getting taxed, especially if you come from the road where walking is failure. Yeah. And you enter your first trail race or join your friends in a trail run and try and run all the hills. At some point, they'll catch up to you. So I think dialing back the effort allows you to enjoy the running a little more and therefore be more consistent, have a better relationship with it, and do more. The idea behind, managing those intensities in the week is the goal is to do as much as we possibly can. And if we dial it back and keep it easier, we don't take as long to recover, and then we can do more of it, provide more stimulus, more adaptation, more fitness. Yeah. So it suits you in the long run to dial it back and take it easier.
I think that's such an important principle as well for beginners to kind of learn, when it comes to training yourself in the beginning for trail running. It's that consistency, but also, it's not meant to be incredibly hard and out of your comfort zone in the beginning. And
so maybe that means walking more often. Maybe that means calling it a hike and running back down again. Yeah. However you need to frame it to keep it easy.
Yeah. And it won't last forever. That's the other. To come into a little bit of a break now, when you're out running and you've been on the trails for quite a while, what is in your pack that you're kind of reaching for? I guess when you get to that kind of like 3-4 hours and everything hurts and you're starving, and
probably fresh water with no sugar in it.
Oh, really?
Obviously we need the carbs, but I think my go-to is generally just cold fresh water. After enough gels and carb drinks. Yeah. Just something else.
And food-wise?
Food-wise, I personally struggle to eat, to be honest. So probably baby potatoes, salted baby potatoes are probably all that's going to go down.
I think as a beginner, that's another important tip is salted baby potatoes.
Yeah, I think it's the most easily carryable, digestible, palatable single item.
I think the big one is, there's so much data out there already, around beginners and getting into trail running and the kind of the mistakes that are made, and people obviously keep making them. So in an attempt to, I guess, to kind of try and get people not to be making them, what are the kind of biggest mistakes you see people making when they're starting out?
Number one is probably running too hard on average. So intensity, I know we've bounced on that topic a few times today, but I think running too hard, either in a pursuit of peer pressure or wanting to perform at a level off the bat. Yeah. So running too hard, not listening to the body, ignoring cues that are likely to be future injuries earlier on, and then and as that sort of intensity or distance builds, generally nutrition is significantly neglected, and they have limits that are purely nutritional. And with a bit of food on board, they can generally do a lot better. So,
It's like ask an experienced runner what mistakes they're making now and then fix those, because it's kind of all the things you ignore in the beginning that then crop up like later on. And I think another thing that's not talked about enough is kind of, the importance of shoes. I think everyone, like as a beginner, you're either going, the cheapest, or you're going whatever your friend wears, or, whatever looks cool. how important is that to that beginning kind of, or I mean, yes, any part of your running?
Yeah, I think you need shoes that fit well. And number one, I don't know if it sounds like a highly simple thing, but on average, people are not wearing shoes fitted correctly. They tend to, on average, purchase shoes that are too small. And if you're out there for a few hours, we need it to still fit you when your feet have swelled up and aren't as happy. So getting that sizing right is probably for me more important than even whether or not you're using a road or trail shoe. You can run a lot of trail on road shoes. So I would say to start off, run. Run in the shoes you have, learn about how you feel in them, and that'll inform you as to what you might need when you purchase something else or what you might like. You don't need to buy the most expensive shoes out there. It's really not necessary. You need something that's durable with a decent amount of grip. Something, if you're coming from the road, looking at something that is the geometry that is similar to what your body is currently used to. So if that's a lower drop or a higher drop, try and replicate that where you can. But yeah, you definitely don't need the fanciest out there to get started.
Yeah.
You need a good fitting pair of shoes with some tread.
We've chatted about it before, but it's also like, where are you running and what races are you kind of looking at?
I think if it's very runnable, your road shoes will be fine. If you're going to jump into Newlands Forest and run those cheap tracks and some of the connecting single tracks, you could probably get away with it in your road shoes. They'll probably take a beating. So you'll probably want to change them at some point so you're not going through shoes quite as frequently. And if you're getting into more technical stuff, where you might be doing some scrambling or much rockier technical routes, then a decent trail shoe will start to be required.
Overtraining, how do you kind of encourage people to kind of pull back that kind of overtraining element? And I think it's also obviously easy, as you say, how do you get that balance between running often, and then obviously not, not running too much? Yeah.
So I think being honest with yourself is important. A lot of us aren't, and we believe that we're superhuman until our body forces our hand and we are forced to stop due to injury or illness or something. So I think there are metrics like resting heart rate that you could track, help HRV, heart rate variability can also help insight into overtraining. But before you even complicate it with that level of insight, I think just checking in with yourself every now and again, like, am I actually feeling okay today? Am I recovered from yesterday? Have I taken 2-3 rest days and I'm still feeling tired and fatigued? That hasn't helped. So I think sort of trying to notice patterns in yourself and how long it takes you to bounce back from different efforts will help you understand. If you have a coach, being honest with them about how you're feeling. It's not a weakness to say that you're tired and need a break. Saying that earlier is probably very helpful. And managing intensity, dialing it back, taking it easier more often, not running everything super hard. And scheduling in rest before you need it is often helpful. If you don't schedule it, the body will schedule it itself and you'll be sitting.
Are there kind of noticeable signs that beginners can kind of pick up on that they've overtrained, or that just go off and you're like, oh, I'm just tired because I never got sleep last night or something like that,
So we need fatigue. Fatigue is what the body's adapting to. You've loaded it. It doesn't want to be loaded to that level again. It provides adaptations to kind of bring you back to sort of homeostasis or balance. So there will be fatigue, and it's expected. It shouldn't last days and days and days. It should be something that, with a few easier running days or recovery days, you kind of feel back to your old self and you're good. If we don't achieve that, it's probably worth looking at what's going on. In terms of other things, muscle pain is expected. We expect some muscle breakdown and rebuilding to happen. Joint pain, aches, tendon, ligament pain, that kind of thing, might sort of appear on bigger days in terms of distance or intensity. If it settles itself within a couple of days of lower volume or rest, then generally good. But if it's week on week, is persistent, getting worse, never fully going away, those are kind of signs that something needs to be checked out.
Obviously, discouragement and is quite a big one when you start. Because as we've said before, everything kind of feels hard and difficult. What is the kind of, I guess, the golden nugget to provide to people that it's like it is going to get better? But obviously it's easier to say that than actually believe it. But what is that kind of advice?
I think if you bring the focus back to why they found the sport in the first place, it's really helpful. it's easier to become discouraged when it's very performance-based and metric-based, because it does take time. I mean, as a beginner, your first 16 weeks are probably going to be pretty uncomfortable before you have fitness to show for all the hard work you've put in. And if every week you're looking at stats and, actually going backwards because you're more tired than you are fit in the first few weeks generally, it's problematic. But you probably found the sport because you enjoy moving through wild spaces. And if you can get rid of the metrics and just move, set your watch up so that all you can see is time, not distance, not vert, not pace, not heart rate, and go and move and allow the body to move quickly on days where it has the ability to do so and slower on days where it doesn't want to, and connect back to that. I think it's easier to offset that sort of lower motivation or discouragement that might creep in.
We often talk about building a base. So what is that? Why is it important? And how can you do it?
So people talk about the base. What is it? So it's a few things. It's your exposure to that sport or stimulus is your base, and that might be years. Overall, it also might be short term. So often there's a base phase and a build up to an event, which might be exposing you to lots of easy effort volume to build your base, or your aerobic base is what it would be called. But it's, as I said, it's also your running age. So a beginner, your base is probably pretty low. And that base then also limits what type of workouts and what other sort of efforts we could expect the body to handle. So the bigger the base, the more exposure you've had to lots of easy effort volume, the more room we have to add on higher intensity workouts, volume at higher intensity and things like that. So building your base is something that you do in the short term. So, for maybe 2-3 months in the build up to an event, but also how long you've been training overall.
I want to ask an interesting question is, I think it tells a lot about a person, when you're out running and the rain comes down, where are you going? Are you pushing through? Are you heading back down the mountain?
I love it. Like, bring it.
Yeah.
I mean, ideally it happens when I'm already running.
Yeah.
I must say I starting in the rain is a different experience.
Yeah.
But if I'm out there and I'm warmed up and it starts pelting down, then just bring it. Give me your best. Let's go.
And are you winter or summer?
I am probably more winter. Give me snow and sleet and rain and I can, I love it. I struggle in the heat, I guess.
I think that's also, I was chatting to someone today about that beginner stage, and I think it's a lot easier to manage the effort in the rain than it is in the heat.
Absolutely. So, I mean, one's conditioning for the heat or exposure to that and management of that is very much fitness related. So the fitter you are, the less the heat will have an effect on you at a given intensity. And for most beginners, as I said, they're already likely to be in the red the moment they start moving. You add heat to that and it gets exponentially harder. So winter helps. It obviously comes with its own safety issues in the mountain and awareness of that and your comfort there. So
I mean, I guess it's like if they had the opportunity, would you kind of then advise people to kind of start running in winter? Obviously, it's when you start is when you start, but is it kind of a better place to kind of start?
I think in Cape Town it allows you a little bit more freedom as to when you run in winter. Like if you, as a beginner, running at 10, 11 in the morning in the middle of summer is going to be hard going. Winter will be a lot more forgiving on that, so it could at least ease that in. At its core, though, it's managing your intensity. So if it's super hot and you listen to your body and don't try and run a pace that you thought you could do, on a cooler day, the heat is manageable.
Closing off, when you kind of look back at like your kind of journey, look back to kind of when you first started running and coaching, is there anything you would kind of tell yourself or say to yourself, when you kind of think about that in the running side and obviously on the coaching side?
So what would I say to younger Erin?
Yeah.
Based on what I've learned.
Yeah.
Probably stay consistent. I think I've, I kind of go all in on things, and when it was just me running, it was, all energy went into that, and, other things came up, business, parenthood and stuff. It was quite difficult to balance those. I think if I had maintained consistency, even if it wasn't huge amounts of volume, I think I would have, appreciated that guidance.
In your running and your coaching?
In running, definitely. In coaching, I don't know. I think I probably would have been less stressed back then, taking on people and the weight that comes with that. If I knew that it would become what it is, and I would feel as comfortable doing it as I have become, I could have saved myself a little anxiety, I guess.
Yeah. Obviously, you love this, and you love the running, and you love the coaching. What is that rewarding? What is the kind of thing that keeps you going, keeps you coming back on both the the running side and the coaching side?
On the running side, I guess it's that finding that flow state, or that those days where it all just clicks and works. It might not be a PB, it might not be your fastest, because we all get older and things change and what we can achieve, but that feeling of effortlessness and in the sweet spot of being able to like hold an intensity for what feels like could be forever. That pursuit is probably the single greatest for me. And as a coach, I think that like being lucky to be able to experience what I experienced as a single runner, pursuing goals and walking that path with people is really rewarding. I think, as a runner alone, you get to do it for yourself. As a coach, you get to experience it every week.
Yeah, no, I can imagine it must be pretty rewarding to have that kind of...
It has its highs and lows. I mean, it comes with bad days too, and you ride those and you get those as well. But I think that would be stand out.
I think someone, and said it to me, it's like, it's nice to kind of take a break from achieving your own things to then being able to celebrate other people achieving things. And it's kind of like you have to do it rather than like, oh yeah, I'm happy for you, my friend. It's like you. So I think that's and
it's cool that you have to, because you're their coach, and I mean you're paid to do this, but also you do become invested. You do see their growth, and it is a very real investment that you have in their success.
We did chat a bit about it, but our next episode in the series is all about shoes, and we've actually got Jono from the Run Store coming in to chat to us. So, what is the kind of the biggest mistake you see people making when it comes to choosing your first pair of shoes? And then also, I mean, how important is it to get someone like Jono or pop into the Run Store?
I think it can save you a lot of headaches by getting fitted correctly off the bat. Price of shoe irrelevant. I think getting something that fits you correctly. You don't need to run 150 Ks, 200 Ks in them to realize that they don't work. At which point you can't change them and then start again. So going to a store that have good experience in that fitment and are able to take you through that process is hugely valuable. Biggest mistake is probably people looking at shoes and thinking they need a whole lot of tread, something that looks like a soccer boot. Unless you're running in really soft mud, you don't need super big lugs. You need something with a bit of protection, a moderate lug depth or lug size. And close enough to what to not be too much of a shock to the body.
Looking forward for yourself, is there, bucket list things that you want to achieve, I guess in the running side, the coaching side, what is the kind of the 5 year or 1 year, 5 year, don't think about too hard. Just
not too hard. I think for my own running, I took most of last year off, and I'm really kind of getting back into it with a renewed sort of vigor and appreciation for the sport. So I have a couple of PBs that didn't get a lot of attention 10 years ago that I could probably revisit. So I'll probably be doing a bit of work on that personally. And then in terms of flat rock, I think just probably start, looking into more ways that we can, be helpful and assist the people we work with. Expanding our knowledge base. We have some really good coaches on board. So looking at ways of upskilling them, as well as just offering more to the people we work with.
Coming back to the beginning of the interview, I asked you about the socks. Have you had a chance to kind of think of what you would want on your...
It's written on the back of the sock. Right? So visible to people behind you.
Yes.
Okay. Keep up.
Love it.
Keep up. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Cool.
That was amazing.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for joining me, and I really appreciate you taking the time and giving us some of your guidance.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Subscribe to the Trail Chasers today and ensure that you never miss an episode. And if you know someone thinking about starting trail running, share this with them. It might be the nudge they need to join you.